Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Well, now, if scarce vaccine supplies are already putting wealthy nations into a tailspin over unfulfilled contracts, what about the countries at the back of the queue? The World Health Organization says no one is protected from this pandemic until everyone's protected. And they're relying on a global scheme to share out vaccine supplies by helping poorer nations secure doses at little or no cost. A scheme which is too big and too important to fail, as Danny Isdale now reports.
Pensioners have been celebrating in Israel for weeks, freedom dances, after their final doses. The syringe that vaccinated their Prime Minister was taken home and framed. A memento of relief for the leader whose nation holds first place in the global vaccination race. Prime Minister Netanyahu did an early deal with Pfizer, offering to provide valuable antibody and infection data in exchange for an uninterrupted supply of plane loads full of vaccine vials bought at a premium. Now, every Israeli over 16 years old is on track to have both shots by the end of March. But Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza are yet to administer any vaccines, despite the UN calling on Israel to provide them.
Well, if you look at the connectivity of the Israeli-Palestinian people, you can't vaccine one part of your society and not the other and think that you're going to be safe.
Jordan's King Abdullah told the virtual World Economic Forum his country was the first to vaccinate Syrian refugees.
That's the number one lesson that COVID taught us, that COVID does not care about borders, the rich or the poor or whoever.
Globally, 81 million doses have been administered across mostly wealthy nations. A group of the richest, representing 16% of the world's population, has locked up 60% of the global vaccine supply. Canada, for example, has pre-ordered enough doses to vaccinate its entire population at least 4 times over, but already has supply delays. African nations, where cases and deaths are now surging, have next to none. Across a continent of 1.3 billion people, the President of Guinea is among the select few to have received a dose.
Just 25 doses have been given in one lowest income country. Not 25 million, not 25,000, just 25. I need to be blunt. The world is on the brink of a catastrophic moral failure.
When the world has safe and effective COVID-19 vaccines, how can we make sure they reach the people that need them most?
This is supposed to be the solution, the WHO-backed COVAX scheme, which is an international vaccine sharing initiative aiming to secure 2 billion vaccines this year for 92 nations in need. The UK donated £500 million to the cause, and with President Joe Biden now in charge, the US is on board too. But can governments promise to help the developing world in real time if they're also promising to vaccinate their own populations as fast as possible? Today, India's first batch of donated vaccines were packed up. The first shipment of millions of promised doses for neighbouring nations made its way to Sri Lanka. Norway too has committed to sharing vials with poorer nations at the same time as vaccinating its own citizens. The success or failure of the COVAX scheme may ultimately depend not on charity or benevolence, but on fear of the inescapability of the mutating virus itself, on the threat that nowhere is safe until everywhere is.
Danny Isdale reporting, and I've been speaking with Dr. Margaret Harris, who's spokesperson for the World Health Organization, and I began by asking her if the COVAX initiative was in serious risk of failing because wealthy countries want to vaccinate their own adult populations first.
There is a risk that the world could fail if they let this happen. So that's why my Director General said the world was on the brink of a catastrophic moral failure, because indeed, if hoarding happens, if there's a rush to hold, if the me first attitude takes hold and there's a rush to grab all the vaccines, we won't vaccinate around the world at the same time, which is what we all need to do.
What are the consequences if COVAX fails? Because I've just seen that the figure for Guinea, for example, in West Africa, is 25 vaccines, where we're talking about having already administered 7-8 million vaccines here in Britain.
There have been several studies recently which have quantified the billions of dollars that will be sucked from the economy if we don't get the world moving again. And we are also connected that unless we bring this down around the world, it will not finish until everybody's safe, nobody's safe. But we need to also bring the high risk, the people who are getting sickest and filling the hospitals and overwhelming health systems around the world, we need to get them vaccinated first, but we also need to vaccinate every healthcare worker because they are the people standing between life and death for all of us.
Now, the British have given £548 million to COVAX, and they also have one of the highest death rates in the world. Aren't they justified in thinking we'd better get the rest of our adult population vaccinated before we go any further?
So, indeed, the British have been really supportive of COVAX, and that shows that there is a great understanding of the critical need to vaccinate around the world. Now, of course, in Britain, you want to be vaccinating the most vulnerable groups. One of the reasons you have a high death rate is you've got the demographics. You've got populations that are very vulnerable to the most severe form of this illness. So indeed, you want to be vaccinating them, and you want to be vaccinating all your healthcare workers who are bearing a tremendous burden. We're saying do it all, but don't aim to vaccinate your entire population. Get all those high-risk groups vaccinated around the world at the same time.
And are you concerned by reports that there are attempts being made by the European Union, possibly to bring in legislation to prevent the export of vaccines?
So all these issues are around concerns about supply, and again, that is why we set up COVAX. It's a facility for the entire world, so it's not simply the countries that don't have the financial or political power to access the vaccines. It's also every country that has joined it has the right to and the access to the vaccines within COVAX. So that was a very good reason for setting it up. The European Union and Britain have been really important drivers of that mechanism as well.
Margaret Harris, thank you very much indeed for talking with us. Thank you.
That's a pleasure. Pleasure being with you.